I was standing barefoot in my own driveway, coffee mug still warm in my hand, when two police cruisers pulled up with lights cutting through the dusk. I thought maybe they were after some neighbor's trouble, but then I heard my son's voice. My son. He was standing across the street with his fiancée, pointing right at me. That's him, he said. That's the man who stole my car. For a moment I thought he was joking. I actually laughed. But the officers didn't laugh. One of them walked toward me with his hand resting near his holster, the other already taking notes. My own boy had accused me of stealing his car, his old black sedan, the one I had given him myself 3 years earlier when I upgraded to a truck. Sir, the officer said, is that your vehicle parked down the block? I followed his finger. There it was, the black sedan, sitting crooked against the curb. My heart dropped into my stomach. It wasn't just that they were accusing me, it was the fact that my son had set the stage so perfectly, moving the car, making it look abandoned. Officer, I said carefully, that car used to be mine. I signed the title over to my son. If it's parked down there, it's because he wanted it there. I don't have a single key to it anymore. The younger policeman squinted at me. Funny, your son here says you threatened to take it back. I turned then, locking eyes with my boy. He didn't flinch. His fiancée leaned into him, whispering something, and I could see it plain as day. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment lie. This was planned. Why are you doing this? I asked him, my voice carrying over the hood of the cruiser. Why would you call the police on your own father? He didn't answer. Just kept that same cold look, like I was nothing but a stranger. The officers stepped aside to talk among themselves, and in that silence I realized something dangerous. This was only the beginning. My son wanted more than a car. He wanted me ruined. And I swore right then, as the flashing lights painted my house red and blue, that I wouldn't let him destroy me without a fight. The officers didn't cuff me, but the way they guided me into the back of that cruiser felt like a cage all the same. My own neighbors watched from their porches, whispering behind cupped hands, the lights flashing across their faces. Not one of them looked at me like the man who had fixed their fences, shoveled their driveways in winter, or lent them tools. No, that night I was just the old man who stole his son's car. Inside the station, the air was stale, humming with the low buzz of fluorescent lights. They sat me down in a small room with walls too white, a table too clean, and a camera blinking red in the corner. Mr. Green, the older officer began, your son claims you entered his garage without permission and took his vehicle. That's grand theft auto. I laughed, and it wasn't a polite one. Grand theft auto? He's making a liar out of himself and you're buying it. The officer folded his hands. He says you've been having disputes lately. Financial disagreements. Maybe some bad blood over inheritance. That word hit me harder than the flashing lights had, inheritance. It wasn't about the car. It was never about the damn car. This was about the little nest egg I'd been saving, the house I still lived in, the tools, the land. Things his mother and I had built over 40 years. I leaned across the table and locked eyes with that officer. You want the truth? That car was mine until I gave it to him outright. Title and all. If you don't believe me, check your records. DMV should have it plain as day. The younger one smirked like he'd heard that excuse 100 times. We'll check, sir. In the meantime, we'd like to hear your side. Did you enter his garage? No, I said, clear and steady. Haven't stepped foot in his garage since he moved into that house. But even as I spoke, a picture formed in my mind, my son standing with his fiancée, whispering, planning. I realized then that this wasn't just about painting me as a thief. This was a campaign. They wanted a file on me, something official, something that would stick. When they left me alone in that room, I stared at the mirrored glass and said it out loud, my boy wants me out of the way. And when they came back, sure enough, they had more questions. Not just about the car, but about whether I'd made threats. Whether I'd been acting erratic. Whether neighbors had heard shouting from my yard. I could see it clearly now, he wasn't just calling me a thief. He was laying the groundwork to make me look unstable. That's when the officer slid a piece of paper across the table. Your son says he's worried about your mental state, Mr. Green. That maybe you shouldn't be handling financial matters anymore. I froze. Because at that moment, it all clicked into place. He didn't want the car. He wanted everything else. When they finally let me walk out of that station, it was past midnight. The night air hit me like cold steel, and I swear the shadows of the parking lot felt heavier than usual. They didn't arrest me, yet, but they left me with a warning: don't contact your son until this is sorted. That alone told me plenty. My boy and his fiancée had been smart about this. They knew if they played the right notes, the police would treat me not as a father in trouble, but as a man unraveling. I went home, sat at the kitchen table with the same mug of coffee gone cold, and stared at the wood grain until dawn. My wife's photo sat across from me, her smile frozen in a frame that suddenly felt more like a reminder than comfort. She had trusted me to keep the family together, and here I was, labeled a thief by my own blood. By morning, I knew one thing: if I wanted to survive this, I needed proof. Not arguments, not words, something that no officer, no lawyer, no judge could twist. 2 days later, I found it. It started with a call from an old friend, Polly, who worked nights at the county clerk's office. He'd heard whispers, seen my name come across a desk it shouldn't have. You'd better come take a look at something, he told me. I drove down there like the devil himself was pushing my truck. When I walked into that dim back office, Polly slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were copies of documents, forms that made my blood run cold. My signature. My handwriting. Only, it wasn't mine. On one form, I had supposedly transferred power of attorney to my son. On another, I had signed over rights to certain accounts. Every T was crossed, every I dotted, but I knew my own hand, and this wasn't it. The strokes were wrong, deliberately careful, like someone had practiced copying me. And there it was, plain as day, the notary's stamp, fresh and official. My son and his fiancée had walked into an office, put forged papers in front of someone, and smiled while pretending I'd signed them. Polly leaned across the desk, whispering low. If these go through, he can touch everything. Bank accounts. Property. Even your medical choices. I felt something inside me harden in that moment. Fear was gone. Even shock was gone. What replaced it was something sharper, steadier, revenge taking root. I left that office with the folder tucked under my jacket, driving home with both hands white-knuckled on the wheel. My son thought he could paint me as unstable, as a thief, while quietly setting up the noose. But he'd made a mistake, he hadn't counted on me finding the proof before he pulled it tight. That night, I sat in the same kitchen chair, folder open in front of me, and whispered to my wife's picture, they tried to bury me. But I'm going to dig first. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like prey anymore. Sitting at my kitchen table under the dim yellow light, the forged papers spread in front of me like a battle map, I felt something click into place. They'd tried to build a case against me, but now I had the foundation of my own case against them. I started small, quiet. The first thing I did was make 3 separate copies of everything Polly had given me, color scans and hard copies. One set went into a locked box at my bank. Another went to an old friend of mine, Ron, a retired sheriff who owed me more than one favor. The third set stayed with me, hidden behind the false panel of the old toolbox in my garage. I wasn't going to be the old fool who misplaced evidence. Next, I went down to the bank myself. The young teller looked confused when I asked for my signature card and compared it to the new documents. The difference jumped off the page. My real signature had the tight slant of a man who'd written in ledgers for 40 years, theirs had the round, practiced loops of someone copying slowly. While the bank manager photocopied everything for internal review, I slipped a USB drive across the desk to him. "Everything on here," I said quietly. Audio of my son threatening me over the car, screenshots of texts from his fiancée about getting the paperwork done. He swallowed, glanced at the drive, and nodded. "We'll secure this, Mr. Green." When I walked out of that bank, the spring air smelled different. Like possibility. I didn't confront my son right away. I acted like nothing had changed. Even called him once, leaving a calm voicemail, "Son, whenever you're ready to talk, I'm here." I knew he'd save it. Knew it would sound exactly like the message of a reasonable man. Meanwhile, Ron, the retired sheriff, was working on his own end. He knew the notary whose stamp had been used. Turned out she'd been doing favors for a handful of people, notarizing without the person actually present, sometimes for a fee. Ron recorded their conversation. Her voice on tape, admitting she hadn't seen me sign a thing. Piece by piece, their perfect story began to crumble in my hands. 2 weeks after that night at the station, the police called again, only this time it wasn't to accuse me. It was to ask me to come down voluntarily, bring any documentation relevant to the dispute. I walked into that station with a manila folder under my arm. Same room, same white walls, same blinking red light. But this time, when the older officer started with, "Mr. Green, your son has updated his statement," I slid the folder across the table. Inside were the forged documents, my real signature cards, the audio, the screenshots, and the transcript of the notary's confession. I watched the officer's eyebrows climb with each page. "I didn't steal anything," I said calmly. "But somebody's trying to steal from me." The younger cop who had smirked at me before looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "We'll need to verify all of this," he muttered. "Do it," I said. "Take your time." As I left the station, the sun was high and warm on my face. I didn't smile, not yet. But I felt something close, not joy, but the solid weight of having the truth on my side. And even as I drove home, I was already planning the next move. Because evidence was one thing. Making sure my son and his fiancée paid for what they'd done was another. The strange thing about revenge is how quiet it feels when you finally hold it in your hands. I didn't rage or shake when I left the police station that day, I just drove home with my window cracked, letting the spring air carry the weight of 40 years of fatherhood that had just been spit on. I knew better than to think the police alone would solve it. My son and his fiancée had already shown how far they were willing to go. People like that don't stop when they're caught in a lie, they just make a bigger one. If I wanted this over, I had to close the noose myself. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. 3 nights later, just after dusk, I noticed headlights idling near the edge of my driveway. My son's sedan, the same one he'd accused me of stealing. He and his fiancée stepped out, whispering hard, her arms folded tight against her chest. They thought I wasn't home. I killed the porch light and stood behind the curtain. She pulled a folder from her bag, thick, bulging with papers. He held a pen, glancing around like a man about to break into his own house. My gut told me exactly what they were doing, planting more evidence. But what they didn't know was that I had installed a trail camera on the oak tree by the drive, the kind hunters use. Motion activated, night vision clear as day. I watched them slip envelopes into my mailbox, fiddle with my truck door handle, even snap a photo of my front porch as if to prove I'd been somewhere I hadn't. Every move recorded. Every whisper caught. When they finally left, I waited 10 minutes before walking out. The folder was still in the mailbox. Inside were fresh papers, one claiming I'd written a threatening note to them, another alleging I'd confessed to taking the car. The handwriting was laughably bad, the kind of clumsy imitation that wouldn't fool a child. But with their signatures at the bottom, it was more than forgery now. It was conspiracy. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I drove the folder straight to Ron, the retired sheriff. He copied everything, then called in a favor with an old contact at the DA's office. By the next afternoon, the prosecutor had the footage, the audio, the forged papers, and the notary's taped admission. I'll never forget the call I got 2 days later. "Mr. Green," the DA said, "will be pursuing charges. Forgery, attempted fraud, filing a false police report. Your son and his fiancée are in serious trouble." For a long moment, I didn't say a word. I just looked at my wife's picture on the mantel. "Thank you," I finally managed. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat on the porch. The same driveway where my son had once learned to ride a bike was now the place he tried to ruin his own father. I heard the sirens before I saw them. 2 cruisers pulling up, but this time they weren't for me. They walked past my house, straight to his door across town. By midnight, both he and his fiancée were booked, their mugshots already stamped into the system they tried to weaponize against me. And me? I sat there with my drink, calm, steady. I didn't feel triumph, not exactly. What I felt was something heavier, the knowledge that I just outlived my own blood in a way no father should ever have to. Because revenge, child, revenge isn't sweet. It's bitter. But sometimes it's the only medicine left. When the news spread that my son and his fiancée had been arrested, the town looked at me differently. Neighbors waved again, folks at the diner asked if I was holding up all right, and the same officers who once questioned my sanity now nodded with respect when they saw me. But respect is a poor substitute for what I lost. You see, I didn't just expose a fraud. I shattered what little was left of a family. My boy sat in jail, his fiancée beside him, their faces pale in the courthouse photos that the local paper ran on page 3. People whispered, pointed, shook their heads at such a shame. Me? I went home to an empty house. The first night after their arrest, I sat in the living room with the forged papers spread across the coffee table. I stared at them until the words blurred together. And in the silence, memories rose uninvited, my son at 10 years old, running barefoot in the yard, my son at 17, grinning in his cap and gown, my son at 20, asking me to trust him with his first loan. How does a boy with scraped knees and hopeful eyes turn into a man who forges his father's name? The trial dragged on for months. They both took plea deals in the end, forgery, conspiracy, false reporting. She got a year in county, he got 2 with probation. Some called it justice. I called it survival. And yet, when I saw him standing in that courtroom, shackled, head bowed, I didn't feel the triumph I'd thought I would. I felt the weight of every mistake I'd made as a father pressing down on me. Because here's the thing, child, revenge doesn't bring back trust. It doesn't rebuild what's been broken. It only proves you can still fight, even when the fight costs you your own blood. The night he was sentenced, I went home, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and set one beside my wife's picture. I lifted mine and said aloud, "I kept us safe, love. But I lost him to do it." The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I sat there until the whiskey was gone, until the moon sank low, until the glass beside her photo went untouched and warm. And I realized then that this was the true ending, not victory, not defeat, but the silence of a man who has survived his own family. When the sentencing was over, and the world thought the matter was closed, life was supposed to return to normal. The neighbors no longer whispered, the police nodded politely when they passed me on the street, and even the bank sent me a letter offering to restore my accounts fully. But there is no normal after your own son tries to bury you alive in lies. One evening, about a month after he'd gone into county, I got a letter. No return address, just my name in a handwriting I knew too well, his. I sat with it in my lap for hours before opening it. Inside, 4 lines. Dad, you won. I hope you're proud. But know this, I'll never forgive you. When I get out, you won't see me again. Consider yourself childless. No plea for understanding, no apology, not even anger worth answering. Just finality. I folded it once, slid it into the drawer of the old desk, and poured myself a drink. And that's when it struck me, revenge had given me the truth, yes, but it had also carved out the last thread that bound us. Some nights, I still walk past that desk and feel the weight of the drawer tugging at me. The letters still inside, yellowing at the edges. Proof that justice can also mean solitude. And yet, I don't regret what I did. I couldn't let him strip me of everything, my home, my savings, my dignity. He left me no choice. But what keeps me awake sometimes isn't the courtroom or the police lights. It's the memory of his small hand slipping into mine when he was just a boy, trusting me with everything. That's what betrayal does, child. It leaves a shadow that outlives the fire of revenge. Now, when I sit on the porch in the evenings, I don't just watch the street. I listen. For a knock that will never come. For a voice that will never call me Dad again. And maybe that's the truest punishment in the end, not his, but mine. It was nearly a year later, in the middle of a gray November afternoon, when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Most days, the only calls I got were salesmen or wrong numbers. But when I picked up, a woman's voice, low and trembling, asked, "Is this Mr. Green?" "Yes," I said slowly. "This is Officer Callahan from County Probation. I'm calling about your son." The name tightened my chest like a vice. For a moment I couldn't speak. She continued, "He's been released on early probation. We're required to notify you since you were part of the case. He's been instructed not to contact you directly." I muttered something polite, hung up, and sat there in the kitchen staring at the faded linoleum until dusk. But here's the thing, a week later, I noticed a shadow. First at the grocery store, a figure just 2 aisles over. Then one evening, walking home from the diner, a car parked 2 houses down, headlights off, engine idling. I knew that silhouette. I'd watched it grow up under my own roof. He wasn't supposed to contact me, but he was watching. One night, just after midnight, I heard the creak of the back gate. Not a raccoon, not the wind, a steady step, measured, careful. I reached for the old baseball bat I kept by the door. When I opened the curtains, there he was, standing in the yard. My son. Older, thinner, eyes darker than I remembered. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, staring at the house like it was something stolen from him. Then, without a word, he turned and walked into the night. That's when I understood something terrible. Revenge had ended the court battle, but it hadn't ended him. He was still out there, nursing the wound, letting it grow into something colder than greed. And I knew, standing there in the half-light of my kitchen, that our story wasn't finished after all. It had only gone quiet, like the still air before a storm. It was 2 weeks after I saw him in the yard that the first real sign came. A letter slipped under my door one night, no envelope, no stamp. Just folded paper with 4 words scrawled across it. "This isn't over yet." I didn't call the police. What good would they do? They'd just tell me to install cameras, change my locks, stay vigilant. No, I knew this had to be handled between him and me. Blood to blood. For a while, nothing happened. I'd walk to the store, sip my coffee on the porch, keep my head down. But I felt it, the eyes. He was out there, waiting, like a snake in tall grass. Then, one night, I came home and found the door ajar. My heart went still. Inside, nothing looked broken or stolen. No smashed glass, no forced entry. But I knew. Someone had been here. And then I saw it, on the kitchen table, beside my wife's framed photo, sat one of my old checkbooks. Open to a blank page. His handwriting across the top line, clumsy but legible. "You owe me." I sat down in that chair, the same one where I'd planned my revenge months earlier, and I felt something shift in me. He wasn't after money anymore, not really. He wanted me broken. Humiliated. Maybe even gone. The next day, I drove 2 towns over to see Ron, the retired sheriff. I laid the checkbook on his desk and said, "He's back." Ron looked at me long and hard. "You want the law involved?" I shook my head. "No. The law already failed once. This has to end the way it started, with me." That night, I stayed awake in the dark, every light in the house off, the bat across my lap. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it, the crunch of gravel on the driveway. I moved slow to the window. His car. Parked crooked, lights off. And then I saw him step out, alone. He walked up to the porch, bold as anything, and reached for the door handle. I opened the door before he could touch it. He froze, eyes wide, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Father and son, nothing left between us but betrayal. "You should have stayed gone," I told him. His jaw tightened, and he whispered, "You ruined my life." "No," I said, voice steady. "You ruined it yourself. I just refused to let you take mine with it." We stood there in the cold silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down. And then, he smiled. A slow, chilling smile that didn't belong to the boy I'd raised. "This isn't the end," he said. And he walked away. That was the night I realized revenge doesn't end with a courtroom, or a sentence, or even a shadow in the yard. Revenge lingers. It feeds, grows, waits for the next chance. And I knew, my son wasn't finished with me yet. It happened on a bitter January night, the kind where the air cuts your lungs and every sound carries for miles. I'd taken to sleeping light, the bat still by my bedside, one ear always open. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, the back gate creaking open. Only this time, there was no hesitation in the footsteps. I rose, slow and deliberate, and stepped into the kitchen. The moonlight spilled across the floorboards, and that's when I saw him, standing in the middle of my living room like he still belonged there. He had something in his hand, half hidden in his coat. A glint of metal caught the light. Not a bat, not a crowbar, smaller. He must have seen me notice, because he shifted it deeper into his pocket. "I told you this wasn't over," he said, his voice low, strained. "You broke into my house," I answered, keeping my own voice steady. "And you're standing here with God knows what in your pocket. What is it you think you're gonna do, son?" His face twisted, somewhere between rage and sorrow. "You took everything from me. My future, my name, my life. You stood in court and made me look like a fool. You did that yourself," I told him. "Every paper you forged, every lie you told, every time you dragged my name through the dirt. That wasn't me. That was you." For a moment, silence stretched. His chest heaved like a man drowning, eyes darting from me to the photo of his mother on the mantel, then back again. I could see it in him, the battle between pulling that thing from his pocket or walking away. I took one step closer. "If you're gonna do it now. But know this, once you cross that line, there's no coming back. You won't just lose me, you'll lose yourself. Forever." His hand twitched inside the pocket. Then it stilled. His eyes burned into mine, and he whispered something I'll never forget. "You were never the father I needed." And just like that, he turned. Walked out the back door into the freezing dark, his shadow stretching long across the snow. The gate creaked once more, and he was gone. That was the last time I ever saw him. No more letters, no more shadows at the edge of the yard. Just silence, the kind that settles deep in your bones. Sometimes I wonder what he carried in that pocket. A knife? A gun? Or maybe just the weight of a choice he couldn't bring himself to make. Either way, that night ended our story. Not with forgiveness. Not with blood. But with a door closing on everything we'd ever been. And that, Child, is the last chapter. Revenge kept me alive, but it cost me a son. Some nights I sit on this porch, look at the road stretching out into the dark, and wonder if he's still out there, building a life, or destroying one. But I know this much, he won't be back here again.